It is part 6 of our series on pocket pistols and other ultra-concealable handguns, and we can't talk about pocket pistols without giving some special attention to the snub-nose revolver. In particular, I want to compare two of the most popular types of snubbies on the market, the Smith Wesson J-frame and the Ruger LCR. The very first member of the J-frame family came in 1950 with the advent of the Smith & Wesson Chiefs Special, later called the Model 36. It was a steel frame 5-shot 38 special available with a blued or a nickel-plated finish. Over the years, Smith & Wesson has produced hundreds of variants of these small revolvers chambered in numerous cartridges made from different materials with all kinds of finishes, barrel lengths, sights, stocks, and dozens of other options. Smith & Wesson's catalog currently lists 52 variants of the J-frame, but the most popular is probably the aluminum-framed Airweight 642. The original Ruger LCR, or Light Compact Revolver, debuted just a few years ago in 2009. It's a double-action only 5-shot 38 special intended to compete directly with the Smith & Wesson Airweights. The frame of the LCR is in two parts. The bottom half, which holds the action, is polymer, and the upper half, housing the steel cylinder and barrel, is aluminum. In 2010, Ruger announced a .357 Magnum version of the LCR with a steel upper half that weighs a few ounces more. Right now, Ruger offers 19 options in their LCR lineup, including 6 different calibers and the LCR X variants, which add a single action capability, and some 3-inch models. Before we get into comparing these two revolvers in detail, I just want to say up front that I don't have a dog in this fight. I have owned and carried multiple J-frames and LCRs. I like both of them for different reasons. I'm going to compare these guns one attribute at a time, but it's not my intention to ultimately declare one better than the other overall. That's going to depend on which specific model you're looking at and how you prioritize each of these attributes based on what your needs are. So let's start with a look at the outer dimensions. The Ruger is slightly larger than the Smith. They have the same barrel length and cylinder width, but the LCR frame is about a 1/4 inch taller through the middle, and the stocks or grips tend to be about a 1/4 inch longer as well. Now that's not much, but depending on how you're carrying the gun, a 1/4 inch could be the difference between being completely concealed and a gun that prints enough to be noticeable. So in terms of size, the Smith offers a very slight advantage. Okay, so how about caliber options? J-frames have been offered in tons of calibers over the years, but in the current Smith & Wesson catalog, there are only 4 options: 38 Special, .357 Magnum, 22 Long Rifle, and 22 Magnum. The LCR is available in all of those same 4 calibers, plus 9mm and .327 Federal Magnum. If you look hard enough and you're willing to pay a premium, you can find some discontinued J-frames in those other calibers, but they're pretty rare. The LCR comes in more caliber options that are readily available today. Next, let's talk about the action, or the quality of the trigger pull. J-frames have a notoriously stiff and heavy action that can be a real challenge to master, especially on the lightweight guns. The LCR is known for having a smooth and reasonably light trigger, usually around 10 pounds. So the Ruger would seem to be the obvious choice in this category, but I want to add a couple of caveats to that. First, the J-frame triggers tend to get significantly better with use. It might take a couple of thousand dry fire repetitions, but eventually the trigger will get smoother. If you want a shortcut, there are some aftermarket spring kits that can make a huge difference too, but you have to watch for light primer strikes if you start messing with the springs. There's also a minor downside to the LCR's action. It has what you might call a false reset. When you fire the gun and you're letting the trigger reset, there are a couple of clicks that kind of feel like the trigger is ready to go again, but it's not. And if you try to pull the trigger again, the cylinder rotates, but the hammer doesn't fall, the gun won't fire. It looks something like this if you're trying to do it rapid fire. Now for some people this is never an issue at all, they never even notice it. It tends to be more of a problem for people who have shot J-frames a lot. The J-frame trigger has a slightly shorter length of travel, and if that's what you're used to, it's really easy to short stroke the trigger on the LCR, especially if you're shooting really fast. Now I wouldn't call that a deal breaker for the LCR, but it is something to be aware of. Okay, now let's look at which one has the better sights. The sights on our semi-auto pistols have improved drastically over the last 30 years or so, at least generally speaking. That has not been the case for snub-nose revolvers. Most of the J-frames and the LCRs come standard with a shallow notch at the top strap for a rear sight and a ramp-style front sight. On most of the J-frames, it's an integral fixed front sight that's machined into the top of the barrel. Some of the J-frames and all of the LCRs have a pinned front sight, so at least you can swap it out for something else like a night sight or a fiber optic. There are a few models with decent sights. The 3-inch J-frames and the 3-inch LCRs have adjustable rear sights that aren't too bad. Some of the newer J-frames have a U-notch rear sight and an XS big dot front sight. The Smith Wesson 640 Pro is an all-steel J-frame with dovetail cuts for the front and rear sight with semi-auto style night sights. Even if you end up with a model that has lousy sights, you can always add some Crimson Trace laser grips, which are available for both the J-frame and the LCR. But for the LCR, they have discontinued the compact models like this. The only style they're still making is quite a bit larger. It comes with a green or red laser, but it's not ideal for concealment. There are 4 different styles for the J-frames, including the compact grips. So overall, the sight situation is not great, but there are more decent options available with the J-frames. Judging these revolvers based on weight is a bit complicated because weight is not necessarily a bad thing. Lightweight revolvers are easier to carry, but heavier revolvers are easier to shoot. Let's take a look at a few different models sorted by weight. At the very bottom, we have the all-steel J-frames like the 22.4 ounce Model 640 Pro that I just mentioned. If you want a Ruger that is as pleasant to shoot as an all-steel J-frame, you have to move up to the larger SP101. The heaviest LCRs are right around 17 ounces. They have a steel upper half, but the polymer lower keeps the weight manageable. I think the 357 LCR loaded with 38 special ammo offers a nice balance of being easy to shoot and easy to carry. Next, we've got the iconic Smith Wesson 642 Airweight with an aluminum frame and a steel cylinder coming in at 14.4 ounces. Guns this light are convenient if you're carrying in a pocket or on the ankle, or really any method of carry that's not on your belt. On the other hand, even with 38s, these guns are a handful. Airweight J-frames have the potential to be incredibly useful for the people who have put in the practice time to make good use of them. Smith & Wesson sells a ton of airweights to people who don't know any better, and for inexperienced shooters, this is not a good choice. If you are a glutton for punishment and your J-frame just has to be a Magnum, you could go for the M&P 340. The frame is aluminum blended with a metal called scandium to make it lighter and stronger, and a lot more expensive. And right around the same weight, we have the original 38 Special LCR at 13.5 ounces. Some people say the recoil is not quite as bad in these as the Smith & Wesson Airweights, but it's still going to be pretty snappy. And among the very lightest of the J-frames is the 340 PD. This one has a scandium alloy frame and a titanium alloy cylinder, making it just 11.8 ounces. You can shoot magnums through these, but it's something people tend to only do once. This is a 342 PD, which is the 38 special only version of the 340. It's an ounce lighter. It's no longer in production, unfortunately. I really don't enjoy shooting anything other than wad cutters out of this gun, but it is really nice to carry. I forget I have it with me half the time. I think it weighs less than my wallet. So while I would not say the LCRs are too light or too heavy, you definitely have a broader range of options with the J-frames. Durability and reliability. The J-frame and the LCR typically exhibit both of these qualities. Of course, there are always exceptions. I have had to send a J-frame and an LCR back to their respective factories for repair after very little use. The J-frames have the advantage of a much longer track record. There are steel J-frames out there with decades of regular use that have been neglected and abused that still work just fine. On top of that, we've got books and manuals and tons of other resources out there to tell us all about how to maintain and troubleshoot a J-frame. The LCR has been out almost a decade and it's developed a pretty good reputation, but compared to the J-frame, it's still relatively unproven. There aren't that many LCRs out there that have 10,000 rounds through them, for example. It does seem to be a very solid design, and I'm not aware of any common widespread reliability issues with the LCRs. With both the LCR and the J-frames, if you're going to have problems, they are most likely to show up either within the first couple hundred rounds or after several thousand rounds. If the gun runs fine with the first few boxes of ammo, it will probably keep running as long as you keep it clean. When you get into very high round count guns, especially with high pressure ammo, the aluminum frames are the ones that usually start having problems because the harder steel parts cause wear on the softer aluminum over time. While we're on the subject of reliability, I should also mention the Smith Wesson internal lock. This is a safety feature they started adding to the revolvers in the early 2000s. It is almost universally hated. The locks have been known to occasionally engage all by themselves under the force of recoil, which means the gun is completely locked up until the user can find their key and unlock it. This problem appears to be most common with the lightweight guns. Fortunately, in the last few years, Smith & Wesson has started to offer some of their J-frames without the internal lock, but only the double action only models. If you buy a new J-frame with an exposed hammer, it's going to have an internal lock. So in terms of overall reliability and durability, I don't think I can choose J-frame in general over LCRs or vice versa, so let's just call this one a tie. Okay, we've got just two more categories to look at. Aftermarket support. The J-frame wins by a mile. You can find just about any holster you want for a J-frame, speed loaders, spring kits, grips, you name it, you can find it for a J-frame. There is plenty of aftermarket support for the LCRs, but if you're looking for something really specific, you're a lot more likely to find a J-frame compatible version of whatever that thing is. Grips in particular seem to be a lot more available for the J-frame. And finally, cost. Most LCRs are priced between $400 and $500 with the Magnums at the higher end of that range, maybe $50 more for the 9mm or 327 versions. J-frame prices are all over the place. At the low end, the standard 642 airweight is usually right around $350, but some of the ultra lightweight models with the exotic metals can sell for $800, $900, sometimes even more. The average price of a J-frame is probably higher than the average LCR price, but you can get a new J-frame for cheaper than you can get a new LCR. So this one is also a tie. Even though we've been looking at this as J-frames versus the LCR, I don't think it's fair to call one of them generally superior to the other. I think of the J-frames as being best if you want something really light or if you want a small steel frame gun that you can shoot a whole lot. The LCRs are better if a smooth trigger is a priority or if you're looking for some of the more obscure revolver calibers. Either way, when you decide on a snub-nose revolver, make sure you feed it with ammo you can get from us with lightning fast shipping at luckygunner.com.